Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting, the possible connection between sensory perception and intuition, specifically in people with autism.
Hmm.
We're basing this deep dive on a blog post called Sensory Perception and Intuition and Autism, and it's from a website called Cheap ABA.
Okay.
We're really going to try to dig into how different ways of experiencing the world, how that might actually lead to some really unique abilities.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We often prioritize logic and reason and kind of forget about all the information our senses give us.
Right.
This could really change how we think about intuition itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So the blog post starts by talking about the autistic sensory experience.
Mhm.
It points out that many autistic people, they experience this heightened sensitivity to stimuli, things like light, sound, touch. It's almost like they're experiencing the world in high definition all the time.
Mhm.
Every sound, every sight, texture, amplified.
Yeah. That's the reality for a lot of people on the
All
spectrum.
right.
And, this heightened sensitivity, it can be a double-edged sword. It can be overwhelming, obviously,
Yeah.
but it could also be a source of some really deep insight. And there's research that suggests that autistic people, they might actually process sensory information more holistically.
Okay, so when you say holistic processing, what does that actually mean?
So it's about seeing the whole picture,
Mm.
taking in everything from all your senses at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
not just focusing on one thing, but like seeing both the forest and the trees. Some studies even suggest that autistic individuals, they might have like stronger connections between different parts of their brains,
Wow.
which could explain this incredible ability to integrate sensory data so well.
Okay, so how does this all tie back into intuition then?
Well, the blog post suggests that this heightened processing, this sensory processing,
Mm.
it could contribute to a more accurate and reliable intuition, almost like a sixth sense. You know what I mean?
Like they're picking up on cues that maybe the rest of us miss. Yeah.
Exactly. Like someone with heightened spatial awareness, something we see a lot in autism. This doesn't just help them navigate tricky spaces. It could also allow them to, like, intuitively sense the emotional temperature of a room. Like they're picking up on little changes in body language or tone of voice.
Hmm.
That feeling you get when you walk into a room, you can just feel the vibe. Whether it's tense or joyful, they might even be able to predict what people are going to do before they do it.
That's wild. So we're not saying that all autistic people are psychic, right?
Right.
We're just exploring this connection between their sensory experiences and intuition.
Exactly. Now, the blog has some personal stories that really bring this to life.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about one person, they wanted to stay anonymous, but they learned to use their sensitivity to sound to inform their intuition. They could pick up on these tiny little vocal cues, pitch or tone, to sense emotions and intentions. They could even predict actions. What's really interesting is how this person took their sensory experience and made it into a tool to understand social dynamics.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you question what we think of as valuable information.
Right. And then there's Rachel, another autistic individual they talk about on the blog. She experiences this heightened sensitivity to light and color, which she says allows her to see auras and sense energies around people.
Yeah, seeing aura is really interesting. Like, could this be her way of interpreting her heightened color perception? Or is there something more? What does this tell us about subjective experience versus objective reality?
Big questions, huh?
Yeah.
She even says, I feel like my sensory experiences have given me a superpower.
Hmm.
That's such an empowering way to look at it. It really challenges what we think of as a superpower.
It does. Rachel's experience is compelling, but it's important to remember that anecdotes are just that. They're anecdotes. We need more research to understand how these sensory experiences could translate to what some people might call extrasensory perception.
For sure. And speaking of research, I'd love to dive a little deeper into the science behind all of this. What do we know about how sensory processing works in the autistic brain?
While these personal stories are really interesting, they also make you wonder, what's the science behind all this? So let's look at the research on sensory processing in autism.
Perfect, because I was just thinking it would be great to kind of ground these stories in some actual science.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about how autistic people might have like more connections between different parts of their brains, right?
Hmm.
This enhanced communication that could explain why they're so good at processing sensory info from lots of sources.
So it's not just that their senses are stronger, it's that their brains are wired differently to deal with all that input.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Imagine our brains are like a city. Hmm. Okay. And all the sensory info is like traffic going through the streets.
Okay.
For someone with heightened sensitivity, it's like rush hour all the time. But if their brain has better roads and like a better traffic system,
Yeah.
they can handle all that traffic better. They're not overwhelmed by it. They're actually using it to navigate the city better.
Okay. I get it. That's a really good analogy. It makes sense that a brain that's good at handling all that sensory info would also be good at picking up on subtle patterns and cues that other people miss.
Exactly. And that's where intuition comes in, right?
Huh.
Intuition is often described as like a gut feeling or just knowing something without really knowing why.
So are you saying that those gut feelings could actually be based on like subconscious processing of sensory information?
That's a really interesting possibility. Let's say you're walking to a meeting and you just feel like something's off.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't really noticed anything specific, but your brain has picked up on subtle changes in people's faces, their tone of voice,
Yeah.
their body language.
Right.
For someone with heightened sensory processing, those signals might be even stronger, so they have a much stronger intuitive response.
This is all so fascinating. It makes you think, do we all kind of dismiss certain sensory experiences as irrelevant when they might actually be important? Maybe we need to rethink how we see the world.
That's a great point. We tend to filter out a lot of sensory information.
Yeah.
We just focus on what we think is important.
Right.
But what if we're missing out on important insights by doing that? What if we all have the potential for way better intuition if we just learn to pay attention?
It makes you wonder about all the potential within the autistic community. If
Yeah.
they're already tapping into this deeper level of sensory awareness, imagine what we could learn from them.
It really is remarkable, and it just shows how important neurodiversity is.
Yeah.
Different ways of thinking and perceiving and experiencing the world. It makes us all better.
Absolutely. So, what does this all mean for our listener? If someone wants to explore their own intuition, are there ways to become more aware of their senses?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are definitely things you can do to be more in tune with your senses. I think practices like mindfulness and meditation can help you become more aware of what's going on both inside and outside of yourself.
So, if you quiet all the noise in your head, you can actually hear your senses more clearly.
Exactly. It's like turning down the volume on all the distractions so you can actually hear those little whispers of intuition, you know?
Hmm.
It's about paying attention to the small stuff, like the feeling of sunlight on your skin or the subtle changes in someone's voice or even just a faint smell in the air.
Thinking back to that person from the blog post, the one who used their hearing to understand other people, it makes you wonder if we all have a dominant sense that we could be using more intentionally.
That's a really cool idea. Maybe if we pay more attention to the sense we're naturally drawn to, we could unlock a whole new level of understanding.
Right.
Maybe you're really visual, you pay a lot of attention to colors, shapes, and things like that. Or maybe you're more tuned into sounds and rhythms.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out what you're good at and then using that to explore the world.
This has been such an interesting conversation. And I have to say, I'm feeling pretty inspired to pay more attention to my own senses. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
I think this deep dive has shown us how important it is to embrace different ways of being and experiencing the world.
Absolutely. For so long, we've tried to make everyone fit into this narrow definition of what's considered normal.
Right.
But the truth is that human diversity is what makes us strong.
Mm.
Just imagine a world where everyone perceived and processed information in the exact same way.
Yeah.
It would be so boring, wouldn't it?
It definitely wouldn't be as exciting or creative.
Exactly. Neurodiversity brings so much to our human experience. It challenges our assumptions and opens our minds to new things. And as we've seen today, it can lead to incredible abilities that we might not even notice otherwise.
So as we wrap up our look at sensory perception and intuition, I have one last question for our listeners. What if the key to unlocking our own intuition is actually embracing the unique sensory experiences that make us who we are?
That's a great thought to leave everyone with. Maybe if we step outside of our comfort zones and see the world through different senses, we can tap into a deeper level of understanding and insight.
Well said. And who knows, maybe we'll all discover a hidden superpower or two along the way.
Until next time, keep those sensory receptors open and stay curious.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.